I woke up that night with a shock going through my body as the hairs on the back of my neck stuck straight up as I rolled quickly out of bed. Staying low, I looked outside the window and the flashes came first. Then the sound. A terrible sound I had tried to forget. A low sound that traveled through the night air. A sound much deeper due to the moisture in the air. A sound that made everything I tried to forget rush back to me. A sound that made me start moving to the boxes. As I got down into the basement, I reached the boxes, and when my hand reached the first one, I paused. I did not want to open this metal box again. If I do, this life I had come to enjoy, dies. For the briefest of moments, I held on to hope that I could hold this life. Keep holding on to everything that was so good that I had. The house. I had someone with me here. I had a good life going. I had a good thing. And then the sound. The sound came through and once again stole that hope from me, and I opened the box. As distant artillery fell, probably on the state capitol if I can figure from here, I began to prepare. From inside the boxes, I pulled out gear that I hoped I would never have to wear again. The cold weather gear, the Equix, went on first, and then the uniform. Then came the armor, the helmet, gloves, rucksack, assault pack. Years of drills and training came flooding back to me as each item was removed from its location and placed onto my body. Everything kept in pristine condition just as I had left it. I could feel my mental state change with every item from the socks to the gloves. I could feel the focus coming back. Turning to the safe, I walked over, punched in the code, spun the handle, and the light immediately turned on. Inside were mostly family heirlooms, like the old break-action shotgun from my great-grandfather. Probably got it out of Sears catalog if I had to think about it. I would have laughed, but I was not in the state of mind for that. But those type of projectile throwers are not what I was looking for. I reached in and pulled out the M14 and my twin 45s. I cleared them and started to load the magazines into my pouches as I heard the artillery still striking way off in the distance. Every so often, the lights would also flicker as the power company was trying to reroute power around to make sure everything was still going. I truly doubted that the lights were going to last too much longer anyway. During this point, a voice called out to me from the basement steps. Cammy had a touch of fear in her voice as she called to me, and when I turned to look at her, her coloration changed into something very dark. It was a deep, deep shade of purple. I didn't realize it at that point, but this was what you saw when her kind was afraid. Instead of the kind man that treated her more like a daughter, niece, or cousin, now stood a man with decades of training ready to go out and do very bad things. As Cammy slowly approached, she stayed clear of the wood stove and looked over at me as I continued with my PCCs, PCIs, pre-combat checks and pre-combat inspections. She asked what and why the lights flickered again as she asked these questions. I asked if she could hear the sounds of the artillery. She paused, but seemed confused. She couldn't hear it, but she could feel something, she said. That is when the lights actually cut out. I immediately turned on my red lens, and Cammy was almost black in fear. I gave her a quick hug and headed towards the radio. Just listening to the ham radio without even calling for anybody was enough to get an idea of what was going on. The entire planet was under attack. Some unknown Xenos had ran right through our space-based defenses and now were starting pre-invasion bombardments. Realizing that some tactics just never change, I knew exactly what was coming next. Heading back to the safe, I pulled out the .22 revolver, handed it to Cammy, and she tried to not take it. I looked at her square in the eyes and said, "I'm not asking." I know this is the only ballistic weapon she could handle aside from my crossbow. If I hadn't been in my current mindset, I might have laughed, remembering when I took her to the range for the first and, well, would have been only time, but I like skeet shooting. I remember thinking that watching a person fall from recoil is funny. Watching somebody that is gelatinous fall over from recoil is hysterical. I listened to the radio as I continued to prepare, and over the radio, we found out that the enemy is going for planetfall, and this got our attention. It appears that they're not focusing on population centers, though, which was surprising to everybody, which even made me pause. Instead, they seem to be heading to where the Gomtik shuttles are parked. Well, that simplifies things for me now, don't it? After telling Cammy that she would have to keep the fire going herself, we get items needed so she can keep the fire going without getting hurt, and I get ready to leave. Before I go, I double check her pistol and make sure that the crossbow is notched. Then, through my mask, I give her just a little peck on the forehead before leaving. Not knowing if the roads will be clear, I put some tape over the light of the ATV and headed into town. It doesn't take long to get close to the town green, not when you know how to get there. On the way, I'm flagged down by others with the same idea. We get into some good positions, and then we have to wait. We wait for what seems like a long time. When you're waiting like that, every second feels like an hour. Like the man says, everything's relative. That is when we notice the light snowfall around us, and we see the vessel coming down. As it gets within about a kilometer, it begins to open fire on the Glomtik shuttle. The Glomtik shuttle takes a few hits and just sits there before exploding in a massive fireworks display. The fire lets us see the approaching ship coming down as it continues to descend. We notice that this is clearly a military bird for sure. No bells and whistles, just straight weapons, engines, and whatever the hell is inside. As it gets close, the exterior doors on both sides open, and we could see something standing on the edge. It was hard to see at that, but it was still coming down. We all waited and then watched as these bipedal suits jumped off the edge and used a type of jetpack to land in the snow. Their movements after they landed proved that these were definitely not robots. Robots don't suddenly move their legs around like they're wondering if they just stepped in a dog turd or something. Just as the second wave jumped off from their ship, someone on our side fired. In that moment, time slowed down to a crawl. In that moment, everyone from human to Xeno realized what was going to happen. In that moment, I unconsciously began to squeeze the trigger at one of those things. The group still inside the craft made very nice silhouettes, and it was like a live pop-up range where the targets only go down if you hit them. Oh yeah, and if they shoot back. The strange blue whatever the hell energy that came out of their handheld weapons were like tracers, and we all know that tracers point both ways. It would have been a complete slaughter if not for the fact that the green energy weapons from the enemy ship started coming down. Much of this would cause anything combustible to ignite once it hit it, to include, unfortunately, a propane tank behind a house. The explosion was so vast and the amount of shrapnel in the air that it even rocked the enemy ship, causing many of those inside to fall down. With each squeeze of the trigger, another enemy falls. Even a grazing hit is enough to breach that strange suit that they're wearing, and this caused many of them to thrash on the ground or desperately try to get back on board their ship, as it was still hovering about 50 feet off the ground, maybe 60. It was hard to tell. My attention was kind of focused elsewhere. The ship's weapons caused many more casualties than those with the suits on, and in response, we began aiming for the ship. And at that point, I kind of wished I had something heavier. The ship itself began to sway a lot, as though the pilot had been having difficult keeping the craft aloft. I don't know if they hit the cockpit or hit something else, but one of the shots into the open hatch must have hit something vital, as there was an explosion seen from the inside. The ship then shuddered and then began to come down hard. Although it wasn't just dropping straight down, but instead it swayed sideways as though it was trying to bank, and then just dropped and then kept sliding sideways. Unfortunately, that went straight into two houses. With their ship down, I screamed out, "Assault through!" This gave everyone the signal to move forward while firing. The sudden appearance of a line or wall of humans slinging lead as well as moving up together must have frightened the Xenos so much, because they suddenly just tried to retreat towards their ship. I say try because, honestly, we didn't let them get to their ship, and no, we didn't have any problem shooting them in the back. Without hesitation, we moved directly towards the ship. My rifle wasn't going to do me much good in tight quarters, so I slung it and drew my twins. Turning the corner, all my training kicked in again. And it wasn't just me. All those hours, days, weeks of training turned us into machines. Killing machines. Once the bay was clear, we went from room to room. Very quickly found out that our aggressors were definitely not human. In fact, they were reptilian. We could see that they were tall, skinny, and their suits didn't protect them or their soft bodies from crap. As one came at me and tried to swing its hand around, I went and shoved it up against the wall using my right forearm underneath its jaw, and then I raised my left hand and put 3 rounds into another one that was coming forward before sliding my right elbow down. This twisted my hand up, and using the pistol in my right hand, I decided to blow the Xeno's frickin' mind. Everything at that point was going very well. And you know what they say about when things go well, because it went very well until one man came running by screaming, "Evac! Evac! Evac!" And you don't have to tell me twice. Whenever you hear that, it's just like the bomb squad. You see them running, you better try and keep up. We ran off into the cold and reached the tree line before the ship itself exploded. Though the explosion itself didn't actually destroy the entire ship and leave it as a giant crater, but it was enough to make the ship itself unusable, as many parts were still flying off it, and as we went to look, a few pieces were still coming down towards the earth. As it burned, we calmly went up and saw each of the aggressors, and we could finally get a very good look at them. Removing their suits, we laid them out so we could see what the hell we're working with. We could see that they were tall, skinny, no tail surprisingly, and had small horns on their heads. This was weird to look at. I mean, seriously, another Xeno? What the hell is going on? And then again, I didn't really want to stick around and search this. I mean, I'm not a detective, I don't think that way. But then again, dawn is approaching, and I'm tired. I told everybody else that, and I decided I just wasn't going to stick around anyway. So I just took a whole bunch of pictures, strapped a couple of the empty suits to the ATV along with several of their weapons, and I headed home. I wasn't in a hurry to get back or anything because something was bothering me. Something was stuck, in the back of my mind. It was digging into the back there and just wouldn't come forward, wouldn't surface. And I don't know what. I don't know, but it gnawed at me the entire ride back. After putting the ATV in the barn with the spoils of war I had collected, I headed towards the house. When I turned the corner, I saw something in the yard. All I could think was, what the hell is that? As I pulled up my rifle. I ran up and found my annoying counterpart, the one who had shoved his arm around my neck earlier. At least, what was left of him. In the fresh snow, his body was covered, but once I showed the sides, it was clear that he had burns all over his body from enemy weapons, most of which were on his back. Closer to the house, I saw another inclined piece of something, and as I got close, I could see that it was an enemy suit. I went up with the barrel forward, and as I rolled it over, I suddenly saw a bolt sticking out of the chest. The broadhead had seemed to pierce all the way through the suit and through the Xeno, and when I looked again, it was just poking out the back. I was worried at that point, and I ran into the house and started calling for Cammy. I started calling as I ran around, and she didn't answer. I thought for sure someone had destroyed her, and then I went down into the basement and I found her with another Glomtic. Both of them were solid black as they curled up holding the revolver and holding on to each other. It took me lowering my rifle and calling out to her before her color came back just a little bit. And then, as she lowered her pistol and I got close, she jumped up and reached out for me. As she squeezed tight, the other one came up to hold me too. And there I was, kneeling on the concrete, waiting for their color to return. I did, though, have one question on my mind, seeing both of these. Do I have to take care of two of them now?